I've come out to my parents 3 different times. The first time as gay when I was 15 years old. The second as a drag queen in my mid-20s, which, by the way, I know that I'm such a natural beauty, but I am wearing 3 hours of makeup and double-stack wigs. Shocking, I know. The third time I came out to my parents was as genderqueer and non-binary in my early 30s. And because I really like to keep things interesting, I decided that on this last time, I would couple it with telling them that I was leaving Google after 8.5 years to go work at an LGBTQ summer camp, and that I had nothing solid lined up after that. If you know my mother, you know it's pretty hard to make her speechless, but I definitely succeeded on that night. You see, when I started doing drag, my dad's biggest concern was how it would negatively impact my career. He told me in my teens that it's okay to be gay, but don't be one of those gays. You know the type that wear women's clothes and march in the parades. Well, I guess we all know how that turned out. I remember arguments we'd have in the car where he'd say things like, "It's okay if you want to play dress up or whatever, but don't put this nonsense on the internet. It's going to hurt your career." But around the same time we were having these conversations, I was also helping arrange Google's Pride presence in the San Francisco Pride Parade, where I got to ride on the corporate float in full drag alongside my CFO as well as the vice president of HR, who at the time was my boss's 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 boss. I told my dad, thank you, "I hear your concern, but I live in a different world than you did. This not only is not hurting my career, but it's actually helped me form relationships with my company leadership and to progress at the organization." But to his credit, a drag performer does not fit the typical archetype of what we think about when we think of a business person. I mean, for goodness sake, with hair this high and my hips and my chest padded like this, I'd be lucky to get into a corporate office in plenty of states across America these days. In fact, in many cases, as LGBTQ people in business, we're made to believe that our identity is somehow a liability. Even when it's not said explicitly, the message we often receive is, just don't make anyone else uncomfortable, or it's probably best not to talk about that part of your life because you might alienate your coworkers or your clients. The truth is, our experience as queer individuals equip us magnificently for entrepreneurship and business leadership. We're resilient, we're often pushed to think outside the box and challenge the status quo. We're familiar with how to ask for help and lean on our community when we need support. And we carry a deep hope and trust that things will work out for the best. And perhaps most importantly, from an early age, we are often forced to grapple with questions around authenticity. Do I pursue the person that I know myself to be, or do I mask, hide, and suppress my identity in order to fit into the norms that others have put upon me? It's this journey towards authenticity. It's important that we not only look at ourselves and also at how those around us perceive us, but also at each other. Those folks sitting next to you, our LGBTQ siblings and family, and examine how we support and uplift others along the way. The Mattachine Society, founded in the 1950s, was one of the earliest LGBTQ rights organizations in the United States. While pivotal to the early movement in challenging societal attitudes and legal discrimination against gay people, Mattachine was seen by many as exclusive and often conservative in its approach, only allowing men to participate in leadership and its activities, and focusing primarily on the rights and concerns of gay men. Early on, it promoted maintaining a respectable and masculine image of gay men in an attempt to gain greater acceptance in society. This frustrated women and more radical LGBTQ activists who saw this as contributing to the erasure of non-binary, genderqueer, and transgender individuals, and who felt that in order to achieve greater rights in society, LGBTQ people needed to challenge the entire societal structure that oppressed them rather than trying to conform to it. I mention this not to wholly condemn the mission or work of groups like Mattachine. In truth, their efforts were critical to the early movement at a time when being openly gay was highly stigmatized and even criminalized in many places. In fact, Mattachine did evolve over time, and organizations such as the Daughters of Bilitis, the Gay Liberation Front, and the Society for Individual Rights emerged to advocate for the broader community. But I think it's important that we call our attention to a couple patterns we see here in Mattachine's early formation that still exist today in the LGBTQ community. The trends of promoting respectability politics as a way to gain acceptance in society, and of folks with the most privilege in our community advocating only for what benefits them rather than looking out for the good of everyone, are themes that still persist. The burden of change should not be on the most marginalized individuals to fit into existing norms, but instead on all of us to challenge and dismantle the oppressive systems and prejudices that limit us. It is possible, and in fact, beautiful, to embrace diversity and fight for justice and equality without compromising one's identity and authenticity. And when the broader society that we live in won't do that work for us, we must do it for ourselves, and we must do it for each other. On social media, I see comments far too often from LGBTQ individuals who were involved in earlier stages of the movement saying things to the effect of, well, we already fought for our rights, but the movement today and the radical inclusion of queer and trans people is hurting the broader cause by turning others against us. These notions sadden me. In fact, when one of us wins, all of us win. And in today's world and political climate, it's critical that we uplift those in the LGBTQ community who face the greatest discrimination and marginalization, especially queer and trans people of color and LGBTQ youth. As Jewish American author and activist Emma Lazarus once wrote, "Until we are all free, we are none of us free. As a queer community, we must carry each other forward." In Out Leadership's 2023 State LGBTQ Business Climate Index, they report that for the second year in a row, most states in the US are becoming less friendly to LGBTQ individuals and businesses. I certainly don't have to tell any of you that the increased political and cultural polarization around LGBTQ identity impacts all of us negatively. But the data shows something else as well, that businesses operating in LGBTQ-friendly environments are more likely to prosper from top-tier employee recruitment and retention, as well as greater customer loyalty and satisfaction, more innovation, and a stronger brand. According to a McKinsey report, LGBTQ individuals who are able to be out and authentic at work are happier with their careers and view their companies and managers more favorably when compared to their closeted peers. The study also showed that companies with greater racial, gender, and ethnic diversity are anywhere from 25 to 36% more likely to have above average profitability. As it turns out, diversity, inclusion, and authenticity not only make for a more positive work environment, but they result in greater financial returns. I saw this in my work at Google, and I see it in my consulting work today. Employees work harder, stay at organizations longer, and live happier lives when they're able to bring their whole self to work, and when their companies take steps to demonstrate that they value them. At Brave Trails, the LGBTQ summer camp where I've spent the last 3 summers working and volunteering, we create a very special space every summer, which we call the Hall of Elders. In this space, we place placards with information commemorating LGBTQ trailblazers, changemakers, and those that came before us that made an impact on our lives. Campers and staff alike are invited to visit the hall in groups, have conversation about queer eldership and history, and add the names of folks from their own journey to the hall who they would like to honor as well. With one group this summer, a particular moment stands out in my memory. A young person raised their hand and proceeded to share how, as a queer person in their teens, they didn't think too much about what life would look like for them past high school. They shared that because of the messages that they see in the media and online, and the lack of LGBTQ role models in their life back home, Many times it was hard to even imagine living happily into adulthood. Some days it felt difficult to make it even another day. But by being at camp, by learning about queer elders and getting to meet LGBTQ mentors, their perception had been changed for the better. And for them, this shift was not just about learning about well-known activists and changemakers. In fact, meeting and learning about normal queer people just living their day-to-day lives gave them hope. The ordinary and often mundane felt profound. Just knowing that queer people regularly live into old age, have meaningful friendships and relationships, start businesses, and raise families was incredibly impactful to them. Yeah, we can clap for that. As I looked around as this young person spoke, the entire room was in tears, and many campers echoed these sentiments as the evening went on. Out Georgia, your very existence gives others hope. And your audacity as LGBTQ people to live authentically, to launch businesses, and to chart a unique path for yourself is in itself an act of resistance, of activism, and of great hope for other people. My life and environment has not always told me that I could be successful and happy as the person that I am today. A drag queen, an LGBTQ summer camp counselor, an entrepreneur and small business owner, and a genderqueer and non-binary person. But I stand before you tonight, this evening, in confidence and in hundreds of sequins, to tell you that all those voices who encouraged me to think differently and to live a smaller life were wrong. Our identities as LGBTQ people are not a liability or something to be hidden. Our authenticity is our superpower, both in how we create wealth and a life for ourselves, but also in how we inspire and give hope to the next generation of queer leaders. By the way, back to those early conversations with my dad, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how far we've grown since then. In fact, my parents are actually here this evening to support me. Mom and Dad, would you stand up here in the back and wave? There was a point in our dialogue where I said to my dad, "This is who I am, and drag is something that I'm going to do. The decision that you have now is whether to get on board or not." And get on board he did. Years later, when he'd come to fully embrace my drag and queer identity, I asked him what ultimately helped him do it. He said at some point, he had to admit the limit of his understanding, let go of the life he had imagined for me, and be open to the path that I would choose for myself. And as it turns out, it's been a more exciting adventure than he ever could have imagined. May we all be lucky enough to learn and grow in such a profound way when we're faced with people in forms of authenticity that we don't understand. Maya Angelou once spoke about the need to have courage and saw it as the most important of all the virtues. She said, without it, you can't practice any of the other virtues consistently. You can be anything erratically now and then, she went on to say. Kind, fair, true, generous, just. But to do that time and time again, you must have courage. As my time with you comes to a close this evening, I want to acknowledge that being your authentic self and advocating for each other is really tough. And it takes courage, sometimes on a daily basis, to push forward and face adversity, hate, and toxic rhetoric that we all know too well in today's world, all while running a business and caring for our loved ones. But in order to achieve our best lives, to connect with our highest and greatest purpose and potential, to lift each other up and inspire the next generation of LGBTQ leaders, I believe that we must pursue authenticity relentlessly and unapologetically. Do it for yourself. Do it for your friends and your peers sitting next to you tonight. And do it for a younger version of yourself. A young person who, if they had the ability to look forward in time and witness all of you here tonight, it not only would have given them immense hope, but seeing you here and what you've achieved would have far and beyond exceeded their wildest dreams of what they could become. Thank you for your time. Good night.